He bulldozer's engine roared as it pushed the last chunks of concrete into the dumpster. Sarah wiped sweat from her brow, finally free from the liability nightmare that had consumed her savings for 3 years. But as she turned toward her house, a shrill voice cut through the morning air. "What have you done to my pool?" Karen stood at the property line, clutching an inflatable unicorn floatie, her face purple with rage. Behind her, 2 police officers approached with confused expressions. Sarah's stomach dropped. Her pool? What fresh hell was this the morning? Sun cast long shadows across Sarah Mitchell's backyard as she stood surveying the freshly filled crater where her swimming pool had been just 24 hours earlier. The contractors had done excellent work. The ground was level, seeded with grass, and looked like it had never hosted the money pit that had plagued her life for the past 3 years. She pulled her phone from her pocket and snapped a photo. Already composing the social media post in her head, finally free from the curse of home ownership gone wrong. The pool had been nothing but trouble since she'd bought the house. Constant repairs, insurance nightmares, and the final straw, a crack in the foundation that would have cost more to fix than her annual salary. "Good riddance," she muttered, kicking at a small piece of concrete the crew had missed. The sound of a car door slamming in her driveway made her look up. Strange, she wasn't expecting anyone, and the mail didn't usually come until afternoon. She walked around the side of her house, brushing dirt from her hands, and froze. A woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a tennis outfit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment was marching up her driveway. Behind her, a police cruiser sat with its doors open, 2 officers emerging with the weary expressions of people who'd clearly been dragged into something they didn't want to deal with. Sarah recognized the woman immediately, though they'd never been formally introduced. Karen Whitfield from 3 houses down, the neighborhood's self-appointed HOA enforcer, despite their subdivision not actually having an HOA. Sarah had heard the stories from other neighbors. Karen who called the city about grass heights, Karen who measured fence posts with a ruler, Karen who had once tried to have a family's Christmas decorations removed in January because they were unsightly. There she is. Karen's voice could have shattered glass. She pointed a manicured finger at Sarah like she was identifying a criminal in a lineup. "Officers, arrest this woman for destruction of property." The older of the 2 policemen, a stocky man with graying temples, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Let's just calm down and figure out what's going on here." Sarah's mouth went dry. "I'm sorry, what?" Karen's face was flushed red, her chest heaving with indignation. "You know exactly what you did. You vandal. You destroyed my family's pool." "Your family's pool?" Sarah's voice cracked with disbelief. "That pool was in my backyard. On my property. I have the deed. The deed means nothing." Karen shrieked, clutching what Sarah now realized was an inflatable unicorn floatie to her chest like a security blanket. "That pool has been part of this neighborhood for 15 years. My children learned to swim in that pool. My grandchildren play in that pool every summer. You had no right." The younger officer, a tall man who looked like he'd rather be dealing with actual crime, stepped forward. "Ladies, let's start from the beginning." He addressed Sarah. "This was your pool." "Yes," Sarah said, her voice steadier now. "I bought this house 2 years ago. The pool came with it. It was falling apart, costing me thousands in repairs, and frankly becoming a safety hazard. I had it removed yesterday." "Safety hazard?" Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. "The only hazard here is you. That pool was a community gathering place. Everyone in the neighborhood used it." Sarah's jaw dropped. "Used it? Without my permission? That's trespassing." "Permission?" Karen's voice rose to an octave that made dogs in the next county whine. "We don't need permission. It's been an understanding for years. The Hendersons who lived here before you were reasonable people. They understood community values." The older officer rubbed his temples. If the pool was on her property lines are just suggestions in a real community." Karen interrupted. "Officer Martinez, surely you can see that this woman has committed a crime against the entire neighborhood." Officer Martinez, his nameplate confirmed Karen's familiarity with him, looked like he'd dealt with Karen before and hadn't enjoyed the experience. "Mrs. Whitfield, removing fixtures from your own property isn't a crime." "But it should be." Karen whirled back to Sarah, her eyes blazing. Do you have any idea what you've done? Where am I supposed to take my grandchildren now? The community pool is 20 minutes away. You've ruined summer for dozens of families. Sarah felt her temper rising. Maybe those families should have asked before treating my backyard like their personal water park. Maybe they should have offered to help with the $5,000 in repairs I've spent over the past year. $5,000. Karen scoffed. Try living in the real world, honey. That's what community investment looks like. Community investment. Sarah's voice was getting louder now. I've been carrying the insurance liability for every kid in the neighborhood. Do you know what my homeowner's premium was? Do you know that crack in the deep end was a lawsuit waiting to happen? You could have just fixed it. With what money? I'm a schoolteacher, not a trust fund baby. Sarah immediately regretted the dig, but Karen's entitled attitude was pushing every button she had. Karen's face went white, then red, then purple. How dare you? The younger officer interjected. Do you have any documentation showing you had permission to use this pool? Karen opened and closed her mouth like a fish. Permission. I told you, it was an understanding. The whole neighborhood knew. But no written agreement. Officer Martinez asked. Neighborhoods don't need written agreements. They need trust. They need community spirit. Things this selfish woman obviously knows nothing about. Sarah had heard enough. Officer, I'd like to file a trespassing complaint. Apparently, half the neighborhood has been using my property without permission for 2 years. You can't do that. Karen's voice reached a new pitch of hysteria. They are children. Families. This is their summer tradition. Their tradition was built on my property without my consent, using my utilities, risking my insurance, and costing me money I don't have, Sarah shot back. If they want a pool so badly, they can build their own or join the country club. Karen clutched her unicorn Floatie tighter. You heartless witch. Do you know what this means? Do you know what you've taken from them? What I've taken? Sarah's composure finally snapped. What about what's been taken from me? My peace of mind? My savings? My right to use my own backyard without finding strangers in it? They weren't strangers. They were neighbors. Neighbors who never introduced themselves. Neighbors who never offered to help with maintenance. Neighbors who left trash in my yard and expected me to clean it up. Officer Martinez stepped between them. Ladies, this isn't solving anything. But Karen wasn't done. She turned to the officers with tears in her eyes. Real tears, Sarah realized with amazement. Officers, you have to understand. This pool, it wasn't just a pool. It was where Tommy Henderson taught half the kids on the block to swim. It's where the Martinez family, no relation, she added quickly, had their daughter's quinceanera photos taken. It's where 3 marriage proposals happened. It's where I couldn't afford to live anymore, Sarah interrupted. Quietly. Do you understand that? I was drowning in debt trying to maintain something I never even got to enjoy because there were always other people in it. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Karen's tears had stopped, but her grip on the Floatie remained tight. Finally, Officer Martinez cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitfield, I understand you're upset, but there's no crime here. The pool was on Ms. Mitchell, Sarah supplied. Ms. Mitchell's property. She had every right to remove it. Karen's face crumpled. But what about the children? What about them? Sarah asked, and her voice was gentler now. Karen, I get that this is disappointing. I do. But you can't seriously expect me to bankrupt myself maintaining a pool for other people's kids. You could have talked to us. We could have worked something out. Like what? A timeshare agreement? Rent? Because honestly, that might have solved both our problems. Karen's eyes widened. You would have considered that. I would have considered anything that didn't involve me shouldering all the cost and liability while everyone else got the benefit. The younger officer looked hopeful. So maybe you ladies can work something out for the future? Talk about solutions. Sarah shook her head. The pool's gone. I can't afford to build a new one. But surely, Karen began. No, Sarah said firmly. I'm done. I spent my emergency fund, my vacation money, and my retirement contributions keeping that thing running. I'm not doing it again." Karen stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something shift in her expression. The tears were gone, replaced by something harder and more calculating. "Fine," Karen said quietly, her voice suddenly calm. "If that's how you want to play it." She turned and walked back to her car, still clutching the unicorn floatie. But just before, Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Karen's triumphant smile and heard those chilling words about property lines. By 5 a.m., she gave up on sleep entirely and made coffee with shaking hands. The anonymous text had haunted her dreams. "You're going to need a good lawyer." She pulled out her laptop and began frantically searching for property surveyors in the area. The earliest appointment she could get was Thursday, 3 days away. 3 days of not knowing if she'd just committed the biggest mistake of her life. Her doorbell rang at exactly 7:30 a.m. Sarah peered through the peephole and saw a man in a cheap suit holding an envelope. Her stomach dropped. "Sarah Mitchell?" the man asked when she opened the door. "Yes." "You've been served." He thrust the envelope into her hands and walked away before she could respond. Sarah's hands trembled as she tore open the envelope. The legal document inside made her knees buckle. Cease and desist order. Destruction of property, demand for immediate restoration, notice of intent to sue for damages. The letter was from Whitfield and Associates law firm. Karen's husband was apparently an attorney. Of course he was. "Ms. Mitchell, you are hereby notified that you have unlawfully destroyed a swimming pool located partially on property belonging to our clients, the Whitfield family. Aerial surveys from 2019 clearly show that approximately 40% of the pool structure extended onto Lot 47, Whitfield property. You are demanded to immediately restore the pool to its original condition or face legal action seeking damages in excess of $75,000. Sarah sank into her kitchen chair, reading the document over and over. $75,000. She didn't have $7,500, let alone $75,000. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her next door. Neighbor, Mrs. Chen. "Sarah, honey, are you okay? I saw the process server." "Mrs. Chen, did you know about the pool? About people using it?" There was a long pause. "Oh, sweetheart, you really didn't know?" Sarah's heart sank further. "Know what?" "The Hendersons. They had an arrangement with several families. Informal, you understand. The pool maintenance was shared, and everyone pitched in for chemicals and repairs. When they moved, I think everyone just assumed." "Assumed what?" "That I'd automatically agree to the same arrangement." "Well, yes. And when you never said anything, we thought you were okay with it." Sarah rubbed her temples. "Mrs. Chen, I work 60-hour weeks. I'm barely home during daylight hours. I had no idea people were in my yard." "But the bills, dear. Didn't you notice the utility costs?" "I noticed. I thought pools were just expensive." Sarah felt incredibly naive saying it. "Oh, honey. The Henderson's electric bill was only about $30 higher in summer. Everyone contributed to keep costs down." $30. Sarah's summer electric bills had been over $300 higher than winter. She'd been paying for the entire neighborhood's pool parties. "Mrs. Chen, what do you know about the property lines?" Another pause. "I don't like to spread rumors, but Karen did have someone out here with surveying equipment a few weeks ago, and she's been asking everyone on the block about their original property surveys." After Mrs. Chen hung up, Sarah sat in her kitchen staring at the legal papers. Her phone buzzed with notifications. Apparently, word was spreading. Her social media was blowing up with messages from neighbors she'd never spoken to. How could you do this to the kids? This pool was a neighborhood tradition. You've ruined everything. But mixed in were a few supportive messages. Good for you. I've been subsidizing my neighbor's hot tub for years. Property rights matter. Don't let them bully you. Check your homeowner's insurance. They might cover legal fees. Homeowner's insurance. Sarah scrambled for her policy documents. After 20 minutes on hold, she finally reached her agent. "Ms. Mitchell, I have to tell you, this is complicated," Agent Rodriguez said after Sarah explained the situation. Policy covers legal defense for accidents on your property, but this could be seen as an intentional act. Intentional. It's my property. If the pool was partially on someone else's property, and you removed it without their permission, that could be considered intentional property damage. Sarah felt the walls closing in. What if I didn't know? Ignorance isn't usually a defense in property law, but let me look into this and call you back. An hour later, Sarah's doorbell rang again. This time it was a woman about her age with kind eyes and a tired expression. Hi, I'm Jennifer Martinez. My kids are the ones who learned to swim in your pool. Sarah braced herself for another confrontation. I wanted to apologize, Jennifer continued, and to explain. Sarah blinked in surprise. Apologize. May I come in? This is going to take a while. Over coffee, Jennifer laid out a story that made Sarah's head spin. The pool arrangement had started innocently enough. The Hendersons had been an elderly couple whose grandchildren visited in summers. They'd invited Jennifer's kids over to play, then gradually other families joined in. When pool maintenance became expensive, everyone had pitched in. But here's what Karen isn't telling you, Jennifer said, leaning forward. The Hendersons tried to formalize the arrangement 3 years ago when they were thinking of selling. They wanted to create some kind of shared use agreement that would transfer with the house. What happened? Karen shut it down. She said it would hurt property values to have legal obligations attached to the deed. She insisted the informal arrangement was better. Sarah stared at her. So Karen prevented a legal agreement that would have protected everyone, including you. If there had been a formal agreement, you would have known about the arrangement when you bought the house. You could have negotiated. But now she's suing me for not honoring an agreement that she prevented from existing. Jennifer nodded grimly. And there's more. Karen convinced everyone that contributing to pool maintenance was voluntary, just being neighborly. But she never contributed a dime herself. Her family used it more than anyone, but she always had an excuse for why she couldn't pitch in. Sarah felt a spark of anger cutting through her despair. So she's suing me for destroying a pool she never helped maintain. It gets worse. Remember how she mentioned her fence project? She had that survey done specifically to see if any part of the pool was on her property. She's been planning this. Planning what? To get you to rebuild the pool at your expense, but with a legal agreement giving her family permanent access rights. She thinks she can force you into a deal where you pay for everything and she gets to use it whenever she wants. Sarah's coffee mug shook in her hands. That's extortion. Welcome to Karen's world. She's done variations of this to half the neighborhood. The Patels put in a fence last year, 6 inches too high according to Karen's research. Cost them $3,000 in legal fees before they gave up and lowered it. Why didn't anyone warn me? Jennifer looked ashamed. Because most of us just try to stay off her radar. She's made life hell for anyone who crosses her. The Johnsons moved rather than deal with her lawsuit over their deck permit. Sarah felt a cold fury building in her chest. So everyone just lets her terrorize the neighborhood. What choice do we have? She's got money and time and a lawyer. For a husband. Most of us are just trying to raise our families and pay our mortgages. After Jennifer left, Sarah paced her house like a caged animal. The more she learned, the angrier she got. Karen had systematically exploited her neighbors. Desire for peace, turning the neighborhood into her personal fiefdom. Her phone rang. Agent Rodriguez. Ms. Mitchell, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that your policy will cover legal defense if this goes to court. The bad news is that it won't cover damages if you lose. How much could I lose? If the court finds you destroyed property that partially belonged to someone else, potentially everything she's asking for, plus court costs and attorney fees, you could be looking at 6 figures. 6 figures. Sarah would have to sell her house and still owe money. But then Agent Rodriguez continued. However, I did some digging. Karen filed an insurance claim 2 years ago for pool damage during a storm. The claim was denied because she couldn't prove ownership of the pool. Sarah's pulse quickened. What does that mean? It means she's claimed before that she didn't own the pool when it suited her purposes. That might be useful if this goes to court. After the call, Sarah sat in her backyard staring at the filled-in space where the pool had been. For 2 years, she'd been living in someone else's version of reality, a version where entitled neighbors helped themselves to her property while she paid the bills. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop by tonight. 8 p.m. I have information you need. 425 Oak Street. She looked up the address. It was 5 blocks away, in the older part of the neighborhood. At 8 p.m. sharp, Sarah rang the doorbell at 425 Oak Street. An elderly man with sharp eyes answered. Ms. Mitchell? I'm Harold Fleming. I've been watching this neighborhood drama with great interest. He led her into a living room lined with filing cabinets and stacks of documents. I'm a retired surveyor, he explained, and I have some very interesting information about your property lines. He spread out a series of maps and surveys on his coffee table. This is the original 1987 survey when your subdivision was platted. This is the 2019 survey Karen had done for her fence. And this, he pointed to. Sarah was waiting outside the law office when it opened at 8 a.m. She'd spent the night researching attorneys, finally settling on Maria Santos, a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for taking on bullies. Ms. Mitchell. Maria said after reviewing Harold's documentation, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of fraudulent litigation I've ever seen. Karen Whitfield doesn't have a prayer. So I can countersue. Maria's smile was sharp. Oh, we can do much better than that. Your neighbor has committed several serious offenses here. Filing a false legal claim, attempting to extort property, possibly even mail fraud if she used the postal service for that cease and desist letter. Sarah felt a thrill of vindication. What's our first move? We are going to flip the script. Instead of defending against her lawsuit, we are going on offense. I'm filing complaints with the State Bar Association against her husband for filing frivolous litigation, and we are going to countersue for malicious prosecution, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and attorney fees. 2 hours later, Sarah walked out of the law office feeling like a different person. Maria had been thorough. They'd documented everything, from the fraudulent survey claims to Karen's pattern of neighborhood harassment. But Sarah wasn't done. She had more calls to make. Her first stop was the county assessor's office. If Karen had been filing false insurance claims about pool ownership, there might be other discrepancies in the public record. Ms. Mitchell. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, looked up from her computer screen with interest. I remember this property. There were some unusual inquiries about it recently. Unusual how? Someone called asking about changing the property line documentation to reflect shared ownership of structures. When I explained that would require a legal survey and court approval, they got very agitated. Sarah's pulse quickened. When was this? About 6 weeks ago. The caller claimed there had been an administrative error in the original survey. Patricia leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, that's not how property lines work. Someone was fishing for information they could use to make a false claim. Do you have a record of who called? Patricia glanced around, then pulled up another screen. Karen Whitfield. She called 3 times in 1 week, asking increasingly specific questions about how to establish ownership of structures built across property lines. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. She was planning this for weeks. Honey, she was planning this before you even filled in that pool. Someone came by in person last month asking to see the original subdivision plat maps. Same woman, I remember, because she was very demanding and didn't like being told she needed to make an appointment. Armed with this new information, Sarah's next stop was the neighborhood itself. If Karen had been systematically bullying people, she needed to document it. It was time to have some conversations. Her first stop was the Patel house, the family. Jennifer had mentioned who'd been forced to lower their fence. Mrs. Patel answered the door hesitantly, but her expression changed when Sarah explained why she was there. You're fighting back. Mrs. Patel's eyes lit up. Really fighting back? I'm trying to, but I need to know what she did to you. What followed was a story that made Sarah's blood boil. Karen had claimed the Patel's fence violated a neighborhood aesthetic standard she'd invented. When they'd asked to see the official ordinance, she'd produced a document that looked official but was actually something she'd created herself. We spent $3,000 on legal fees before we discovered her ordinance was fake, Mr. Patel said. Bitterly. By then, we couldn't afford to keep fighting. It was easier to just lower the fence. Do you still have copies of her fake documents? Every single page. We kept everything in case we ever got the chance to expose her. The Patels weren't the only ones. Over the next 4 hours, Sarah visited 8 houses and heard 8 different versions of the same story. Karen had been running elaborate scams for years, using fake regulations, misread surveys, and invented neighborhood standards to harass anyone who didn't comply with her vision of how the neighborhood should look. The Johnsons had been forced to move after Karen filed a complaint claiming their deck was built on her property, a claim that was completely false but would have cost them $20,000 to fight in court. The Williams family had been bullied into removing a vegetable garden because Karen claimed it violated residential zoning requirements that didn't exist. The elderly Mr. Patterson had been forced to cut down a beautiful oak tree because Karen insisted it was encroaching on public airspace, whatever that meant. Every family had documentation. Every family had been too afraid or too broke to fight back. And every family was more than willing to provide Sarah with evidence of Karen's pattern of harassment. By evening, Sarah had a box full of documentation and a notebook full of witness statements. But she had one more stop to make. She rang the doorbell at 1247 Maple Street, Karen's house. Karen answered the door in a silk robe, clearly not expecting visitors. Her confident smirk faltered when she saw Sarah's expression. Well, come to apologize and discuss rebuilding my pool. Your pool. Sarah stepped closer, letting her voice carry the cold fury she'd been building all day. That's interesting, Karen, because I just spent the day with a retired surveyor who proved that pool was entirely on my property. Not 1 inch of it was on yours. Karen's face paled slightly, but she rallied quickly. That's ridiculous. I have documentation. You have fraudulent documentation created by misreading a legitimate survey. The State Bar Association is going to be very interested in your husband's role in filing a lawsuit based on evidence he knew was false. You can't prove. I can prove everything. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Karen a photo of Herald's survey. 40 years of surveying experience versus your husband's law degree. Guess which one knows how to read property markers? Karen's composure cracked slightly. Even if that's true, you still destroyed community property. Community property. Sarah laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Like the community property fence you forced the Patels to rebuild based on fake ordinances? Like the community property tree you made Mr. Patterson cut down based on invented regulations? Like the community property deck that forced the Johnsons to sell their house? Karen's eyes widened. You've been talking to everyone. Every single family you've bullied over the past 5 years. Amazing what happens when people realize they're not alone, isn't it? Karen's hand tightened on her doorframe. Those situations were completely different. They were exactly the same. You find people who can't afford to fight back, you invent legal justifications for your demands, and you use the threat of expensive litigation to force them into compliance. Sarah stepped closer. But you picked the wrong person this time. Karen. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you. By tomorrow morning, my attorney will have filed countersuit against you and your husband for malicious prosecution, filing false legal documents, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud. The State Bar Association will receive complaints about your husband's professional conduct, and the county prosecutor will receive documentation of your pattern of harassment and extortion. Karen's face had gone completely white. You can't. I can. And here's the beautiful part. Every family you've bullied over the years is going to be watching. When they see that you can be beaten, when they see that your fake legal threats don't hold up in court, what do you think is going to happen? Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. I'll tell you what's going to happen, Sarah continued. The Patels are going to sue you for the $3,000 you cost them with your fake ordinances. The Williams family is going to file harassment charges. Mr. Patterson is going to demand compensation for the tree you had no right to make him cut down. And that's just the beginning. This is harassment. No, Karen. Harassment is what you've been doing to this neighborhood for years. This is justice. Sarah turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Karen? You might want to check your homeowner's insurance policy. I doubt it covers legal fees for frivolous lawsuits and fraud charges. As Sarah walked back to her car, She heard Karen's door slam with enough force to rattle the windows. But she also heard something else, the sound of other doors opening. The Patels had come out onto their porch. The Williams family was standing in their driveway. Mr. Patterson was visible in his window. Word was spreading. The neighborhood was watching. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Martinez. Is it true? Are you really fighting back? She typed back, it's true. And I'm not fighting alone. Within an hour, Sarah's phone was buzzing. Constantly. Neighbors she'd never met were reaching out, offering support, sharing their own stories of Karen's harassment. A group text formed spontaneously, then grew to include nearly 20 households. But the most important call came at 9 p.m. Maria Santos, her attorney. Sarah, I have news. Karen's husband just called my office. They want to settle. Already. Apparently, word got out about our countersuit. Someone who understands the legal system just realized how much trouble they're in. Maria's voice was satisfied. They're offering to drop their lawsuit entirely and pay your legal fees if you agree. The courthouse steps were packed at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning. Word had spread beyond Sarah's neighborhood. Local news crews had picked up the story of the pool war that had escalated into a full-blown legal battle exposing years of systematic harassment. Sarah stood with Maria Santos, watching as Karen and her husband Richard approached with their own legal team. Karen looked haggard, her usual perfect appearance showing cracks. Richard Whitfield, a thin man with nervous eyes, kept glancing at the news cameras with obvious discomfort. Last chance to settle, Richard called out as they passed. This is going to get very ugly for everyone. Maria smiled coldly. It already got ugly, Mr. Whitfield. 5 years ago when your wife started her harassment campaign. Inside the courtroom, Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the extensive documentation both sides had filed. What had started as Karen's lawsuit over a destroyed pool had mushroomed into a complex case involving multiple countersuit claims, bar association complaints, and criminal referrals. This is highly unusual, Judge Morrison said, looking over her glasses at both legal teams. I've never seen a property dispute generate this much collateral litigation. Karen's attorney, a man named Bradley Hoffman who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, stood first. Your Honor, my clients wish to withdraw their original complaint and settle all matters privately. Too late for that, Maria responded. Smoothly. Mr. Whitfield and his wife have engaged in a pattern of fraudulent litigation and neighborhood harassment spanning 5 years. This court needs to address the systematic abuse of the legal system. Judge Morrison turned to Richard. Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, you're a member of the State Bar. Did you review the property survey evidence before filing suit against Ms. Mitchell? Richard's face reddened. Your Honor, I relied on information provided by my wife, information that has since been proven false by 3 independent surveyors. The judge interrupted. Did you conduct any due diligence before filing a lawsuit claiming $75,000 in damages? The evidence seemed credible at the time. The evidence was a deliberately misinterpreted survey that any competent attorney should have verified. Judge Morrison's tone was ice cold. Mr. Whitfield, I'm referring your conduct to the State Bar Disciplinary Committee. Karen shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. All I wanted was my family's pullback. Sit down, Mrs. Whitfield, Judge Morrison ordered. Your pool. According to the evidence before me, that pool was never on your property. Not 1 square inch of it. That's not. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court has reviewed documentation of your previous disputes with neighbors. The Patel fence situation, the Johnson deck controversy, the Patterson tree removal. In every case, you appear to have used false or misinterpreted legal claims to force compliance with your personal preferences. Karen's face went white. Those were separate matters. Those were rehearsals for this lawsuit, Maria interjected, standing. Your Honor, we have witnesses prepared to testify about Mrs. Whitfield's pattern of harassment. Over the next 2 hours, a parade of neighbors took the stand. Mrs. Patel testified about the fake ordinances Karen had used to force them to rebuild their fence. Mr. Patterson, despite his age, spoke clearly about being bullied into cutting down a healthy tree based on invented regulations. Jennifer Martinez explained how Karen had systematically exploited the informal pool arrangement while contributing nothing herself. But the most damaging testimony came from Patricia, the county assessor's clerk. She testified about Karen's repeated calls trying to find ways to establish false ownership claims over neighborhood properties. She asked specifically about how to create documentation showing shared ownership of structures built across property lines. Patricia testified. When I explained that would require legal action and proof of actual shared ownership, she asked about ways to make it appear as if such agreements had existed previously. Judge Morrison turned to Karen with barely concealed disgust. Mrs. Whitfield, did you contact the county assessor's office seeking ways to fabricate property ownership claims? Karen's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook him off. I was protecting community interests. You were committing fraud, the judge snapped. Mr. Hoffman, control your client. Bradley Hoffman looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Your Honor, if I may request a brief recess to consult with my clients. Denied. Mrs. Whitfield, you've had ample opportunity to consider your position. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of malicious prosecution, filing false legal documents, and harassment. The judge paused, reviewing her notes. Ms. Mitchell, the court awards you full attorney fees and costs. Mrs. Whitfield, you are ordered to pay $15,000 in compensatory damages for emotional distress. Karen gasped audibly. But more importantly, Judge Morrison continued, this court is issuing a permanent restraining order prohibiting Mrs. Whitfield from initiating any legal action against neighbors based on property disputes without first obtaining verification from a licensed surveyor and approval from this court. You can't do that. Karen shouted, finally losing control completely. I have rights. I have property rights. You have the right to remain silent, Judge Morrison said dryly, which I strongly recommend you exercise. Mr. Whitfield, your wife's outburst in my courtroom is being noted for the Bar Disciplinary Committee. Richard grabbed Karen's arm, trying to pull her back to her seat, but she yanked away. This is insane. These people have no respect for community standards. No respect for tradition. That pool was used by families for 15 years. Mrs. Whitfield. Judge Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet. That pool was on Ms. Mitchell's property. She had every right to remove it. Your family's unauthorized use of another person's property for 15 years doesn't create legal ownership. It creates evidence of trespassing. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of Karen's ragged breathing. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to filing false legal documents and attempted extortion. Karen sank into her chair, finally seeming to understand the magnitude of her situation. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Ms. Mitchell, do you wish to address the court? Sarah stood, her voice steady and clear. Your Honor, I just want to say that this was never about money or revenge. This was about stopping a pattern of abuse that had terrorized my neighborhood for years. Mrs. Whitfield's tactics only worked because she targeted people who couldn't afford to fight back. Sarah turned to look directly at Karen. I could afford to fight back. And now everyone knows that she can be stopped. Judge Morrison nodded approvingly. The court commends Ms. Mitchell for her courage in exposing this pattern of harassment. This case will serve as a precedent for future malicious litigation claims in this jurisdiction. As the judge's gavel fell, the courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. Karen sat frozen in her chair while Richard frantically consulted with their attorney. Outside the courthouse, Sarah was surrounded by neighbors and news reporters. The story had grown beyond a simple property dispute. It had become a symbol of standing up to neighborhood bullies. Ms. Mitchell, a reporter called out, what's your message to other people dealing with similar harassment? Sarah looked at the crowd of neighbors who had supported her, thinking of all the people who had suffered in silence before this moment. Document everything. Find allies. And never let anyone convince you that keeping peace is more important than standing up for what's right. Jennifer Martinez stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Sarah, I can't thank you enough. My kids can finally play in our own yard without Karen calling the city about imaginary violations. Mrs. Patel nodded vigorously. We are getting our fence back to the height we wanted. And we are sending Karen the bill for the original construction costs. Harold Fleming appeared at Sarah's shoulder with a satisfied smile. 40 years of surveying, and I've never been happier to donate my services to a good cause. As the crowd began to disperse, Maria Santos pulled Sarah aside. "There's one more thing. Richard Whitfield called me 20 minutes ago. They want to sell their house and move." Sarah felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy. Because of the legal troubles. Because their neighbors finally know who they really are. Turns out Karen's tactics only worked when people were isolated and afraid. Once the neighborhood united against her, their power structure collapsed completely. Sarah looked back at the courthouse where her battle had been won. What happens now? Now you go home to your peaceful backyard and your reasonable neighbors. The restraining order means Karen can't harass anyone else without serious legal consequences. And Richard's facing bar disciplinary proceedings that could end his career. As Sarah drove home, she passed the Whitfield house. A for sale sign was already planted in the front yard. Karen was visible through the window, frantically packing boxes. The message was clear. The neighborhood's reign of terror was over. But as Sarah pulled into her own driveway, she noticed something that made her smile. Several neighbors were outside, talking together openly for the first time in years. The Patels were consulting with the Williams family about fence. 3 months later, Sarah stood in her backyard watching a very different kind of neighborhood gathering. The Williams family had organized a block party, the first one in 5 years, according to Mrs. Chen. Tables laden with food stretched across 3 adjoining yards, and children ran freely between properties without anyone worrying about imaginary violations. "Sarah," Jennifer Martinez called out, approaching with a beer and a huge smile. "Have you seen the local news?" Sarah shook her head, accepting the drink gratefully. Richard Whitfield was officially disbarred yesterday. The disciplinary committee found he'd been filing frivolous lawsuits for his wife for years, not just here but in their previous neighborhood too. Sarah nearly choked on her beer. Previous neighborhood. Turns out this wasn't Karen's first rodeo. Maria Santos did some digging. They've moved 4 times in 10 years, always leaving behind a trail of harassment lawsuits and angry neighbors. Mrs. Patel appeared beside them, practically glowing with satisfaction. And the criminal charges were filed today. Mail fraud, filing false legal documents, and conspiracy to commit extortion. Sarah felt a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. How much time could she get? 2 to 5 years, Mrs. Patel said cheerfully, plus massive fines. Apparently, when the FBI started investigating, they found similar schemes in 3 other states. Harold Fleming joined their circle, carrying a plate piled high with Mr. Patterson's famous barbecue. Best part is, the court ordered restitution to all her previous victims. The Johnsons are getting their moving costs covered, plus damages. Sarah looked around at her neighbors, people who had been strangers 3 months ago but were now genuine friends. "I still can't believe it's over." "Oh, it gets better," Jennifer said with a mischievous grin. "Tell her about the house, Harold." Harold's weathered face creased with amusement. "The Whitfield house sold last week. Guess who bought it?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "A family with 4 kids and 2 dogs, Harold said. They're planning to put in a playground in the backyard and maybe a small pool." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Karen's house would now be home to exactly the kind of family activity she'd spent years trying to suppress. "Speaking of pools," Mrs. Chen appeared with a knowing smile, "we have something to show you." She led Sarah to the front of the group, where a small crowd had gathered around something covered with a top. Mr. Patterson, despite his age, was practically bouncing with excitement. "Sarah," he said formally, "this neighborhood owes you a debt we can never fully repay. You gave us back our community, so we wanted to give you something back." He pulled away the top, revealing a beautiful hand-carved wooden sign, "Mitchell Community Garden, where neighbors become family." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. The sign marked a plot of land where 6 neighbors had pooled resources to create a shared garden in the empty lot at the end of the block. The lot Karen had tried to claim was residential only when the Williams family had attempted something similar 2 years earlier. "We thought," Jennifer said softly, "that instead of everyone having their own pools and fences and separate spaces, we could create something we all share. Legally, this time, with proper agreements and everything." "Maria Santos helped us draw up the paperwork," Mrs. Patel added. "No more informal arrangements that can be exploited." Sarah walked closer to examine the garden. Raised beds were already planted with vegetables, herbs, and flowers. A small greenhouse sat in one corner, and there were plans marked out for a children's play area. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered. "The best part," Harold said, "is that it's on land the city donated after Karen's harassment complaints were investigated. Turns out she'd been filing false reports about that lot for years, claiming it was unsafe for community use. When the city actually inspected it properly, they realized it was perfect for a neighborhood garden." Sarah laughed through her tears. Even in defeat, Karen had inadvertently helped the community she'd tried to destroy. "There's one more thing," Mr. Patterson said, producing an envelope from his pocket. "This came for you yesterday." Sarah opened it to find a check for $35,000, her share of the restitution money from Karen's previous victims in other states. When the FBI investigation had uncovered Karen's pattern of harassment across multiple jurisdictions, they'd seized assets to compensate all her victims. $35,000, Sarah breathed. "More than enough to pay off any remaining legal fees and maybe take that vacation you mentioned," Jennifer said with a grin. As the party continued around them, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here. 3 months ago, she'd been an isolated homeowner drowning in debt from a pool she never wanted. Today, she was surrounded by friends in a neighborhood that had rediscovered its sense of community. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos. "Saw the news about the criminal charges. Justice served. Also, I have 3 new clients dealing with similar harassment cases. They all mentioned your story gave them courage to fight back. You started something bigger than you know." Sarah smiled, looking around at the vibrant gathering in what had once been a neighborhood paralyzed by fear. Children played freely, neighbors planned joint projects, and everyone contributed ideas without worrying about imaginary violations. Later that evening, as the party wound down and neighbors began cleaning up together, Sarah walked back to her house. The space where her pool had been was now a beautiful patch of lawn where she'd started her own small herb garden. The grass had grown imperfectly, and there was no trace of the concrete crater that had once represented her financial stress. She sat on her back steps with a glass of wine, watching the last of the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. For the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a 555 area code. "Ms. Mitchell? This is Rebecca Torres from Channel 7 News in Phoenix. We heard about your case and wondered if you'd be willing to share your story. We have a neighborhood here dealing with a very similar situation." Sarah listened as Rebecca described a familiar pattern, a self-appointed neighborhood enforcer using fake regulations and legal threats to control residents, targeting people who couldn't afford to fight back. "Would you be willing to talk to these families?" Rebecca asked. "Maybe share some advice about how they can protect themselves." Sarah looked out at her peaceful neighborhood, thinking about all the Karen Whitfields in the world who counted on people being too afraid or too isolated to fight back. "Absolutely," she said. "What they need to understand is that bullies like this only have power when their victims feel alone. But once a community stands together, once they stand together, the bullies fall," Rebecca finished. "That's exactly what happened here." After the call ended, Sarah remained on her steps as the stars began to appear. Tomorrow, she would help another community find its courage. Next week, she was scheduled to speak at a homeowners' rights conference. Maria Santos had asked her to consult on 2 more cases involving neighborhood harassment. What had started as a simple desire to remove a problematic pool had become something she'd never expected, a mission to help other people reclaim their communities from fear. Her final thought before heading inside was about Karen Whitfield, probably sitting in a jail cell somewhere, finally facing consequences for years of terrorizing innocent families. Sarah felt no satisfaction in Karen's downfall, only relief that she could never hurt anyone else again. And in neighborhoods across the country, families dealing with their own Karen Whitfields were finding the courage to stand up, organize, and fight back. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to say enough to change everything. Sarah looked one last time at the space where her pool used to be, now transformed into something beautiful and peaceful. She'd lost a pool, but gained so much more. She'd gained a community. She'd gained her voice. And she'd gained the knowledge that ordinary people, when they stand together, are stronger than any bully. The neighborhood was quiet now, but it was the good kind of quiet, the peace that comes from safety, not fear. And tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new friendships, and the continued growth of a community that had finally learned its own strength. Sarah went inside to plan her next conversation with another neighborhood that needed to hear a simple truth. They didn't have to be afraid anymore. The pull was gone, but the ripples of courage it had created would spread far beyond. One small neighborhood, touching lives that Sarah would never even know about.